Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the cold spray of a Viking longship as iron shackles bite into your wrists, watching your homeland disappear into morning mist while foreign voices decide whether you'll live or die. You feel the rough planks beneath your feet, smell the salt and sweat of dozens of other captives, and realize that everything you once called life has just been torn away by bearded strangers who speak in harsh, guttural tones. The story may solve mysteries you never had an explanation for, about how medieval Europe really functioned beneath its glorious surface. So, before you explore the story with me, please take a moment to help me subscribe to the channel, like and share this video, or maybe leave a comment below, but make sure you do it when you really like what I bring to you. Feel free to comment where and when you started watching this video, or maybe give a compliment about tonight's journey into the shadows of history. Now let's keep the lights as soft as possible. Turn on the fan for a gentle sound to help the story feel more emotional, and let's embark on tonight's journey together. You blink awake to the rhythmic splash of oars cutting through dark water, your head throbbing from the blow that knocked you unconscious during the raid on your village. The wooden deck rolls beneath you as waves slap against the hull, and you slowly realise that the nightmare wasn't a dream. You're really here, bound with rough rope alongside 24 other captives who sob quietly or stare into nothing with hollow eyes. Your captors move efficiently around the longship, adjusting sails and checking supplies with the casual competence of men who've done this countless times before. The Vikings call you thrall now, a word that will define every breath you take for years to come, though you don't understand their language yet. Your property now, as much as the silver arm rings they wear, or the iron weapons stacked near the mast. Your new reality crashes over you like the cold spray that soaks your torn clothing. You'll never see your family again, never walk the familiar paths of your village, never sleep in the bed where you once felt safe. The ship's captain, a grizzled man with intricate tattoos covering his forearms, occasionally glances at his human cargo with the same calculating look he might give livestock at market. He's already mentally dividing the captives into categories: the young women who'll fetch high prices as domestic slaves, the strong men destined for back-breaking labour, the children who might be trained for specialised tasks if they survive the journey. You're part of a business transaction now, and your individual humanity matters less than your potential market value in Dublin or Kaupang. Historians still argue whether Viking slave raids were primarily economic ventures or cultural expressions of dominance. But for you, chained in this longship, the distinction feels meaningless. What matters is the growing hunger in your belly, the rope burns on your wrists, and the terrifying uncertainty of what awaits you at journey's end. You notice how some captives have already begun the psychological transformation from free person to property, their spirits seemingly broken by the reality of their situation. The Vikings share dried fish and stale bread among themselves, while you and the other thralls receive barely enough water to keep you alive, just enough to ensure you'll reach the slave markets in sellable condition. You learn your first Viking lesson. Your life has value only as long as you can be profitable. The wind picks up, filling the striped sail as the longship cuts through increasingly rough seas, carrying you further from everything you've ever known toward a future that stretches ahead like a dark tunnel with no visible end. As night falls over the endless water, you huddle against other captives for warmth, listening to their whispered prayers in languages you don't recognize. Some are Christians like yourself. Others follow older gods, but all of you share the same desperate hope that somehow, someday, you might taste freedom again. The stars above seem impossibly distant and cold, offering no comfort as you drift towards sleep on the hard planks, wondering if tomorrow will bring death or something worse. You smell Dublin's slave market before you see it. The stench of unwashed bodies, human waste and fear mingling with wood smoke from cooking fires as your longship approaches the muddy harbour. The Vikings drag you and the other captives onto the docks, your legs wobbling after days at sea while merchants examine your group with the cold calculation of farmers evaluating livestock. Your heart pounds as you realise this bustling riverside settlement exists primarily to trade in human misery, with thralls being bought and sold like grain or iron tools. The auction block stands in the centre of the market square, a worn wooden platform stained dark from years of use, surrounded by potential buyers who poke and prod captives with casual cruelty. You watch in horror as the Vikings strip other slaves naked for inspection, buyers examining teeth, muscles and scars like horse traders evaluating breeding stock. Women are groped openly while purchasers discuss their potential for domestic work or childbearing, their humanity reduced to questions of market value and reproductive capacity. When your turn comes, rough hands tear away your remaining clothes despite your desperate attempts at modesty, leaving you exposed to the jeers and comments of the crowd. A wealthy merchant in fine wool robes circles you slowly, lifting your arms to check for strength, running calloused fingers along your spine to test for deformities, even forcing your mouth open to examine your teeth for signs of disease or age. You want to fight, to scream, to maintain some shred of dignity, but the iron collar around your neck and the Viking guards with their ready weapons make resistance seem futile. The auctioneer calls out prices in Norse while you stand trembling on the platform, understanding nothing except that your fate is being decided by strangers who see you as merchandise. Bidding grows heated between two potential buyers, a red-bearded farmer who keeps squeezing your biceps and a stern woman in expensive furs who seems more interested in your hands than your muscles. You realise with growing dread that your entire future depends on which stranger offers more silver for your body and labour. Dublin's slave market operates with shocking efficiency, processing hundreds of captives each month from raids across Ireland, Britain and the European mainland. The Vikings have turned human trafficking into a sophisticated business, with established trade routes, quality grades for different types of slaves, and even primitive insurance systems to protect investments during long sea voyages. You're just one small cog in this vast machine of exploitation that stretches from Iceland to Constantinople. The stern woman wins the bidding with a final offer that makes the crowd murmur appreciatively, though you have no idea whether you've sold for a fortune or a pittance. She approaches the platform with confident strides, examining her new purchase one final time before nodding to the auctioneer and counting out silver coins from a leather pouch. You belong to her now, as completely as if you were a horse or a cooking pot, and the legal systems of every Viking settlement will support her absolute ownership. Historians still argue whether Dublin's slave markets were primarily local enterprises or international trading hubs, but archaeological evidence suggests they rivaled Constantinople in scope and sophistication. Iron shackles, weighing scales for silver, and even primitive slave-holding cells have been excavated from beneath modern Dublin's streets, revealing the industrial scale of this human commerce that helped fuel Viking expansion across Europe. Your new owner fastens a rope around your neck and leads you through the market like a dog, past other auction blocks where fresh captives from your homeland are being stripped and examined. You catch glimpses of familiar faces in the crowd of slaves, neighbours, perhaps even relatives, but there's no time for recognition or farewell as you're pulled toward the harbour where your owner's ship waits. The reality sinks in that you may never see these people again, that your shared suffering in the longship might be the last connection to your old life. The merchant woman, you'll later learn her name is Astrid, examines you once more in the better light near the docks, checking your palms for calluses that might indicate useful skills and studying your face for signs of intelligence or tractability. She nods with satisfaction, apparently pleased with her purchase, though you feel like screaming at being evaluated like livestock. A younger man, possibly her son, helps load you into their trading vessel alongside sacks of grain and bundles of wool, treating you as just another piece of cargo. As Dublin's slave market fades behind your new owner's ship, You understand that this was just the beginning of your nightmare, not the end. The auction block was merely the first step in a process that will strip away not just your clothes and freedom, but potentially your very sense of self. You're sailing towards an unknown future where every sunrise will bring fresh humiliation and every sunset will mark another day stolen from the life you'll never live again. Your new owner's longhouse emerges from the morning mist like something from a fever dream, its high timber walls and curved roof beams stretching longer than any building you've ever seen, while smoke curls from a central fire hole that seems to beckon you toward either warmth or hell itself. Astrid yanks on the rope around your neck as you stumble up the muddy path, past outbuildings where other slaves tend livestock and repair tools, their eyes briefly meeting yours with expressions of pity mixed with relief that they're not the newest arrival. The great hall's heavy wooden doors creak open to reveal a world of shadows and flickering flame, where dozens of people move through the smoky interior like ghosts in the dancing firelight. You smell roasted meat, stale ale, and unwashed bodies as your eyes adjust to the dim interior, slowly making out carved pillars decorated with serpentine designs and wall hangings that seem to writhe in the uncertain light. This isn't just a house. It's a complete society under one roof, with Astrid ruling as its absolute queen and you as her newest possession. Your stomach clenches as you realize how many people call this hall home. Astrid's extended family, visiting traders, craftsmen, warriors between campaigns, and at least 20 other thralls who scurry about their duties with the practiced efficiency of those who know that hesitation means punishment. The social hierarchy reveals itself quickly. Free Vikings lounging on benches near the central fire, while slaves serve them food and drink, maintaining careful distances that speak of invisible but deadly boundaries you must learn to navigate. Astrid shoves you towards an elderly thrall named Gunnar, a man whose stooped shoulders and scarred hands tell stories of decades spent in bondage, his once proud bearing now bent by years of submission and survival. He speaks to you in broken fragments of your native tongue mixed with Norse words, explaining in whispers that your life now depends on reading the moods of your owners like a sailor reads changing weather. One wrong gesture, one misinterpreted command, one moment of defiance could bring swift and brutal consequences. The hall operates by rules that seem to shift like smoke in the wind, with Astrid's temper serving as the ultimate law that governs every thrall's existence. You watch as she strikes a young slave girl across the face for serving ale too slowly, then laughs warmly at a joke told by her nephew moments later, the casual violence and sudden warmth creating an atmosphere of constant tension where everyone walks on invisible eggshells. Gunnar whispers urgently that survival depends on becoming invisible when Astrid is angry, useful when she's content, and absolutely silent when she's drinking late into the night. Your sleeping space is a straw-filled corner near the kitchen area, separated from the free inhabitants by a low wooden partition that provides the illusion of privacy while ensuring you remain always visible to your owners. The straw smells of mould and previous occupants, and you discover that sharing this cramped space with 3 other thralls means learning to sleep despite constant movement, whispered conversations, and the occasional nightmare that erupts in foreign languages you can't understand, but somehow recognise as the universal sounds of trauma. Historians still argue whether Viking households functioned as extended families or economic units, but for you, lying on mouldy straw while free Vikings feast just yards away, the distinction matters less than understanding the invisible currents of power that flow through this wooden world. You notice how even free members of the household defer to Astrid's authority, how her word can elevate or destroy anyone under her roof, and how your very existence depends on staying within the narrow boundaries of her tolerance. The hall never truly sleeps, with thralls rising before dawn to tend fires and begin the day's endless labour while their owners stretch luxuriously in warm beds lined with fur and wool. You learn that your body no longer belongs to you. Every muscle, every hour of strength, every moment of consciousness is now Astrid's property to use as she sees fit. The concept of personal time, of choosing your own activities or resting when tired, becomes a memory as distant as your homeland's familiar hills. As your first night in the hall stretches endlessly toward dawn, you listen to the breathing of dozens of people whose lives intersect under this massive roof. From the snores of well-fed Vikings to the restless shifting of fellow thralls who dream of homes they'll never see again. The central fire burns low but never dies, casting moving shadows on carved walls that seem to mock your predicament with their intricate beauty created by free hands for free eyes. You close your eyes and try to remember what it felt like to make choices about your own life, but already that memory seems as fragile as morning frost. You wake to Gunnar's urgent whisper in the pre-dawn darkness, his weathered hand shaking your shoulder as the first hint of grey light seeps through the smoke hole above the dying embers of last night's fire. Your muscles ache from sleeping on straw, and your empty stomach gnaws at itself. But there's no time for the luxury of gradual awakening. The thrall's day begins before the roosters crow, and hesitation brings the sharp crack of Astrid's willow switch across your back. The morning ritual unfolds with practiced precision as you stumble through tasks that will define every sunrise for years to come, hauling water from the well in leather buckets that seem to grow heavier with each trip, feeding livestock that eye you with more dignity than your human owners show, and splitting firewood until your hands blister and your arms burn like forge iron. You quickly learn that Viking society depends entirely on slave labour. Without thralls like you, the complex machinery of raids, trade and political alliances would collapse like a house built on sand. Your first assignment sends you to the cow byre, where the sweet smell of hay mingles with the less pleasant odours of animal waste and your own unwashed body, while Astrid's prize cattle regard you with liquid brown eyes that seem almost sympathetic to your plight. The milking technique proves surprisingly difficult to master, requiring gentle patience that feels foreign after days of violence and degradation, though the warm milk that occasionally splashes on your hands provides a small comfort in this world stripped of kindness. The rhythm of thrall labour becomes hypnotic in its relentless repetition. Milk the cows, muck the stalls, carry water, split wood, tend the fire, serve the free folk, clean up after them, prepare for tomorrow's identical cycle of servitude. Your hands develop calluses within days, your back grows accustomed to constant bending and lifting, and your mind begins the dangerous process of accepting this grinding routine as normal rather than the theft of a human life it truly represents. Breakfast means watching free Vikings consume warm bread, fresh cheese and thick porridge, while you and the other thralls receive watery gruel barely sufficient to maintain working strength. Enough nutrition to keep you functional, but never enough to feel satisfied or strong enough to consider rebellion. You learn to eat quickly and gratefully, understanding that even this meagre sustenance represents a privilege that could be withdrawn at any moment for the slightest infraction. The morning's wood splitting reveals the brutal mathematics of slave economics, as Astrid calculates how much firewood her household needs against how much labour she can extract from her human property before exhaustion renders you useless. You swing the heavy axe until your shoulders scream and your vision blurs, but stopping means punishment, and punishment might mean reduced rations that could leave you too weak for tomorrow's identical demands. Historians still argue whether Viking slaves performed primarily agricultural work or specialised crafts, but archaeological evidence from settlement sites reveals the staggering scope of thrall labour. Everything from metalworking to textile production, from food preparation to construction, suggesting that free Vikings lived lives of relative leisure supported entirely by human bondage. You begin to understand that you're not just serving one family, but supporting an entire social system built on the systematic exploitation of people like yourself. The sun climbs higher as you move between tasks with mechanical efficiency, your mind gradually numbing to the horror of your situation through the mercy of routine and exhaustion. Other thralls work alongside you in companionable silence, their presence offering the only comfort available in this world where kindness between slaves might be the closest thing to human connection you'll experience for months or years to come. Midday brings a brief respite as you collapse in whatever shade you can find, sharing precious water with fellow slaves while Astrid and her family enjoy their leisure inside the cool hall. These stolen moments of rest become sacred, allowing you to remember that you're still human despite every effort to reduce you to a working animal, though even this brief comfort carries the constant anxiety of resuming labour before your owners notice your absence. The afternoon stretches endlessly ahead with more wood to split, more water to carry, more animals to tend, more endless tasks that serve no purpose except to extract every ounce of strength from your body before nightfall brings the temporary mercy of collapse. You realise with growing despair that this isn't a temporary ordeal but the permanent shape of your existence. Tomorrow will bring identical tasks, identical exhaustion, identical despair, stretching into a future that seems to have no end except death. The kitchen's smoky interior becomes your second prison as Astrid assigns you to food preparation duties, where every grain of barley, every strip of dried meat, and every pinch of precious salt must be accounted for under the watchful eye of Helga, the head cook whose scarred arms and permanent scowl speak of decades spent managing both ingredients and the slaves who handle them. You quickly discover that kitchen work means navigating deadly undercurrents of household politics where a misplaced spoon or oversalted stew could trigger accusations of sabotage that end with your broken body floating in the nearest fjord. Your trembling hands learn to prepare meals for people who regard you as less than human, grinding grain into flour while wondering if today might be the day someone decides you've outlived your usefulness and slips poison into your evening gruel. The paranoia proves justified when you overhear whispered conversations about previous kitchen slaves who died mysteriously after displeasing powerful family members, their deaths dismissed as accidents or natural causes while everyone understood the real message being sent to surviving thralls. Helga teaches you to taste every dish before it reaches the high table, not out of concern for your palate, but because slave lives are expendable ways to test for poison in a world where Viking families settle disputes with deadly subtlety. You realise with growing horror that you've become a human shield against assassination attempts, your body serving as an early warning system for dangers that threaten your owners, while offering you no protection except the cold comfort that you will die quickly if someone succeeds in their murderous plans. The kitchen's hierarchy reveals itself through violence and favouritism as brutal as anything in the main hall, with Helga ruling through a combination of culinary expertise and casual cruelty that keeps younger slaves in constant terror of her iron ladle and sharp tongue. You watch her beat a boy half to death for dropping a pot of stew, then comfort a weeping girl whose burned hands testify to lessons learned through pain rather than patience, understanding that survival here depends on pleasing an unstable woman whose moods shift like smoke in changing wind. Meal preparation becomes an exercise in psychological warfare as you learn to read the subtle signs that indicate which family members are plotting against each other, whose alliances have shifted since yesterday, and who might be desperate enough to use poison as a political weapon. The seemingly innocent act of serving ale becomes fraught with danger when you realise that choosing the wrong person to serve first could be interpreted as taking sides in feuds that slaves are forbidden to understand, but required to navigate. Your nights in the kitchen bring a different kind of terror as you help clean the cooking vessels and prepare for tomorrow's meals, working by flickering firelight while shadows dance on soot-blackened walls, like demons celebrating your captivity. The stored food represents wealth beyond anything you ever imagined in your former life. Wheels of aged cheese, barrels of honey, sides of smoked meat, yet you're forbidden to take even a crumb beyond your meagre rations without risking brutal punishment. Historians still argue whether Viking household poisoning was common or rare, but saga literature is filled with references to deadly meals and suspicious deaths that suggest food preparation carried real political significance in a society where violence simmered constantly beneath the surface of daily life. You begin to understand that your position in the kitchen makes you both a potential weapon and a likely victim in conflicts that have nothing to do with your own survival. The complexity of Nordic cuisine surprises you as Helga demonstrates techniques for preserving meat through smoking and salt curing, creating fermented dairy products that smell like death but apparently taste like heaven to Viking palates, and preparing elaborate feast dishes that showcase your owner's wealth and status to important guests. You're simultaneously amazed by the sophistication of their food culture and disgusted by your role as an unpaid contributor to their culinary success. Late evening kitchen duties involve banking the cooking fires to smoulder through the night, cleaning every surface until it gleams in the firelight, and arranging ingredients for tomorrow's meals with mathematical precision that would impress you if it weren't accomplished through the systematic exploitation of your stolen labour. The kitchen never truly rests, and neither do the slaves who keep it functioning, creating an endless cycle of preparation, cooking, serving and cleaning that grinds through human lives like grain through a mill, as you finally collapse onto your straw bed with hands that smell permanently of smoke and grease. You realise that kitchen slavery has introduced new layers of complexity to your captivity. You're no longer just a source of physical labour, but a participant in the intimate life of the household, privy to conversations and secrets that make you simultaneously valuable and dangerous to the people who own your body and increasingly seem to own your soul. The first snowfall transforms your already miserable existence into a nightmare of bone-deep cold that penetrates every crack in the longhouse walls, turning your breath into visible clouds while you huddle with other thralls in the drafty quarters where frost forms on the wooden beams above your head. You discover that Viking winters are designed to test human endurance beyond all reasonable limits, with temperatures that make your teeth chatter uncontrollably and winds that howl like tortured spirits around the hall's massive timbers throughout the endless northern nights. Your threadbare slave clothing provides no protection against the savage cold that seems to seep into your bones and settle there permanently, making every movement painful and every breath a sharp reminder of your vulnerability in this harsh landscape. The free Vikings wrap themselves in thick wool and warm furs, while you and the other thralls make do with whatever scraps of fabric you can find, often sharing body heat in desperate huddles that offer the only defence against freezing to death in your sleep. The morning ritual of breaking ice on water barrels becomes a daily torment as your bare hands stick to the metal implements, leaving skin behind when you finally pull away, while the livestock you tend seem better protected against the elements than the human beings who care for them. You realise with bitter irony that Astrid's cattle enjoy warmer shelter and better insulation than her slaves, their economic value apparently exceeding yours in the cold mathematics of Viking property management. Food shortages begin to affect even the free members of the household as winter storms prevent hunting and fishing expeditions. But the slaves feel the pinch first and most severely as your already meagre rations shrink to starvation levels that leave you dizzy with hunger and weak from malnutrition. You learn to scavenge scraps like a wild animal, fighting other thralls for potato peels and mouldy bread crusts that would have disgusted you in your former life, but now represent the difference between life and death. The psychological torture of winter confinement proves almost worse than the physical discomfort, as you're trapped inside the smoky hall with your tormentors for months at a time, unable to escape their presence or find solace in outdoor labour that at least offered the illusion of movement and purpose. The long nights stretch endlessly while you listen to Vikings tell stories and play games around the warm central fire, their laughter and comfort serving as constant reminders of the human warmth and fellowship that slavery has stolen from your life. Your sleeping area becomes a battlefield for survival, as thralls compete for the warmest spots farthest from the walls, with the oldest and weakest slaves gradually pushed toward the coldest corners, where morning often reveals their frozen corpses that nobody mourns or even acknowledges beyond the practical question of disposal. You witness death becoming routine and normalized, a natural consequence of winter that the free Vikings accept as easily as they accept the need to feed their horses or mend their tools. Historians still argue whether Viking slaves received adequate winter provisions or were deliberately allowed to die during harsh seasons to reduce feeding costs, but archaeological evidence of mass graves near slave quarters suggests that winter mortality among thralls reached devastating levels that would be classified as systematic extermination by modern standards. You begin to understand that surviving until spring represents a victory against deliberate neglect designed to cull the weak and maintain only the most valuable human property. The hall's heating system favours the free inhabitants while leaving slave quarters barely above freezing, creating a physical hierarchy that mirrors the social one as warm air rises toward the high table, while cold settles in the low areas where thralls sleep and work. You spend countless hours fantasizing about the warmth of the central fire that remains forever forbidden to your frozen body, understanding that even heat has been weaponized as a tool of control in this carefully designed system of human degradation. Illness spreads rapidly through these slave quarters as malnutrition and exposure weaken immune systems already compromised by stress and despair, with coughs and fevers claiming victims faster than winter storms claim ships at sea. You watch fellow thralls sicken and die while receiving no medical attention beyond the grudging provision of herbal remedies that Vikings use for their livestock, reinforcing the message that your life has value only as long as you can work. The endless winter nights blur together in a haze of cold, hunger, and exhaustion as you dream of warmth and freedom, while your body slowly adapts to conditions that would have killed you within days in your former comfortable life. You realize that survival requires not just physical endurance, but psychological armor against despair, as winter tests not just your body's limits, but your mind's ability to maintain hope when every day brings fresh evidence that you may never see spring, let alone freedom. The wooden cross hidden beneath Gunnar's straw mattress represents more than carved pine. It's a lifeline to a god who promises salvation, even in the depths of Viking bondage, though practicing your Christian faith now requires the secrecy and cunning of a spy operating behind enemy lines. You discover that several other thralls share your beliefs, whispering prayers in Latin during the brief moments when your overseers aren't watching, their voices barely audible above the constant background noise of the Great Hall's daily activities. Your first glimpse of Norse religious practices comes during a blessing ceremony for Astrid's new trading vessel, where you watch in fascinated horror as the household gathers around carved wooden idols, while a Godi priest speaks incantations that sound like growling wolves mixed with ancient poetry. The rituals involve animal sacrifice, blood sprinkled on carved runes, and invocations to gods with names like Thunder, Thor, Odin, Freya, whose wooden representations seem to stare at you with hollow eyes that promise violence to those who refuse their worship. The pressure to convert begins subtly, with small rewards offered to thralls who participate in Norse ceremonies and subtle punishments visited upon those who resist, creating a psychological campaign designed to erode your faith through a combination of incentives and fears. You witness other Christian slaves gradually abandoning their beliefs under this constant pressure, rationalizing their apostasy as necessary survival while their souls slowly surrender to the darkness that surrounds them in this godless land. Astrid herself leads the conversion efforts with the zealousness of someone who sees religious conformity as essential to household unity, alternately threatening and cajoling her Christian slaves to abandon what she calls their weak southern god in favour of the powerful Norse deities who supposedly blessed her family with wealth and victory. You listen to her arguments with growing unease, understanding that refusing her religious demands could easily result in punishments that make your current suffering seem mild by comparison. The clandestine Christian community among the slaves develops its own secret rituals and coded language, with Bible verses whispered during work and prayers offered through carefully disguised gestures that look like ordinary labour to watching guards. You find strength in these furtive moments of worship, though the constant fear of discovery adds another layer of stress to an existence already stretched beyond human endurance by the demands of slavery and survival. Your faith faces its greatest test when Astrid forces all household slaves to attend a major Norse festival, requiring you to witness rituals that involve not just animal sacrifice, but the burning of offerings that include personal possessions from conquered Christian communities, prayer books, wooden crosses, even fragments of church altars that crackle and smoke in the ceremonial fires. The deliberate desecration of Christian symbols serves as both religious ceremony and psychological warfare, designed to demonstrate the powerlessness of your god against Norse might. Some Christian thralls eventually succumb to the pressure and publicly convert, receiving better treatment and warmer clothing as rewards for their apostasy, their improved circumstances serving as a constant temptation for those who continue to resist religious conversion. You watch former believers embrace Norse ceremonies with apparent enthusiasm, though you sometimes catch them making secret signs of the cross when they think nobody is looking, suggesting that conversion might be more performance than genuine transformation. Historians still argue whether Viking religious tolerance extended to slave populations or whether conversion was systematically enforced, but runic inscriptions and saga literature suggest that household religious unity was considered essential for divine favour and practical cooperation. You begin to understand that your faith represents not just personal belief, but a form of resistance that threatens the total control your owners seek to exercise over every aspect of their slaves' existence. The winter solstice brings the most intense religious pressure as the Norse household celebrates Yule with elaborate ceremonies that all members are expected to join, including thralls who must choose between participating in what they consider pagan rituals or facing punishment for religious defiance. You struggle with the moral complexity of survival versus faith, wondering if God would forgive pragmatic compromise or expect martyrdom from his followers in bondage. Your secret prayers become more desperate as the religious pressure intensifies, begging God for strength to maintain your faith while surrounded by constant temptation to abandon beliefs that bring nothing but additional hardship in an existence already defined by suffering and degradation. You cling to memories of church services in your homeland, trying to reconstruct hymns and scriptures from fragments remembered through the haze of trauma and exhaustion that clouds your mind like smoke from the Norse ceremonial fires. The selection process begins with Astrid examining female thralls, like a horse breeder evaluating mares, checking their teeth, hips, and general health, while calculating which combinations of male and female slaves might produce the strongest and most valuable offspring for her expanding human and livestock operation. You watch in sick fascination as your owner treats slave reproduction as a business investment, pairing thralls based on physical attributes and perceived genetic advantages with no regard for personal feelings or existing relationships among her human property. Your own potential for breeding becomes apparent when Astrid assigns you to share quarters with Brigid, a young Irish woman whose haunted green eyes and trembling hands tell stories of recent capture and ongoing trauma that mirrors your own psychological wounds. The arrangement isn't romantic, it's agricultural, designed to produce slave children who will belong to Astrid from birth and provide decades of unpaid labour to support her family's prosperity long after you and Brigid have worked yourselves to death in her service. The brutal mathematics of slave breeding reveal themselves as you learn that thrall children represent pure profit for their owners, requiring minimal investment in food and shelter while eventually providing a lifetime return through their forced labour, domestic service, or potential sale to other Viking households. Astrid explains these calculations openly, discussing her human breeding program with the same casual tone she uses when planning crop rotations or livestock purchases, treating slave fertility as just another resource to be managed and exploited. Bridget whispers stories of other breeding slaves who are forced to watch their children sold away at market age, the heartbreak of maternal separation, serving as another tool of psychological control that keeps female thralls compliant through the threat of losing the babies they've been compelled to bear. You realise that any children you might father in this system will face the same fate that befell you, stolen from their families, sold like livestock, and condemned to lives of bondage that stretch across generations like a hereditary curse. The living conditions for breeding slaves prove slightly better than those endured by ordinary thralls, with marginally improved nutrition and warmer sleeping arrangements designed to maximize reproductive success rather than provide actual comfort or dignity. You understand that this apparent kindness represents calculated investment rather than human compassion, as Astrid protects her breeding stock the same way she protects valuable cattle during calving season, not from love, but from economic necessity. Your relationship with Bridget develops under circumstances that make genuine affection nearly impossible, as both of you understand that any children resulting from your forced pairing will be enslaved from birth and potentially separated from their parents whenever economic advantage dictates such heartbreak. The psychological trauma of participating in your own exploitation creates emotional barriers that prevent the natural human connections that might otherwise develop between people sharing such intimate circumstances. Other breeding pairs in the household exist in various states of resigned acceptance, desperate rebellion, or complete psychological breakdown, their relationships twisted by the knowledge that love and family formation serve only to provide more human property for their owners, while deepening their own emotional investment in a system designed to exploit their most fundamental human needs. You witness the complete perversion of natural human bonding as Viking masters manipulate reproductive instincts to strengthen the chains of bondage rather than create genuine families. Historians still argue whether Viking slave breeding was systematically organized or developed through informal household practices, but archaeological evidence of slave quarters designed specifically for family units suggests that thrall reproduction was carefully managed to maintain steady supplies of human property across generations. The discovery of children's graves in slave burial areas reveals the heartbreaking reality that even successful breeding programs couldn't protect thrall families from the casual violence and neglect that characterized their treatment throughout the Viking world. The psychological impact of forced breeding extends beyond the immediate participants to affect the entire slave community, as thralls understand that their most intimate human experiences have been commodified and weaponized against them by owners who recognize that emotional bonds create vulnerabilities that can be exploited for greater control. You realize that love itself becomes dangerous in a system where caring about someone only provides your oppressors with additional leverage to ensure your compliance and submission. As winter progresses and your forced cohabitation with Bridget continues, you struggle with the moral complexity of your situation. Resisting breeding means facing severe punishment, while participating makes you complicit in perpetuating the system that enslaves you both. You find yourself hoping that she won't conceive while simultaneously understanding that sterility might bring even worse consequences from an owner who expects reproductive success from her human investments, creating a psychological trap with no escape route that doesn't involve suffering or moral compromise. Your hands discover their hidden talent during the long winter months when Astrid assigns you to the household forge, where the rhythmic hammering of red-hot iron provides blessed warmth while teaching you skills that transform you from mere labourer into valuable craftsman, a promotion in status that brings both privileges and new forms of captivity. The elderly smith, Eric, recognises your natural aptitude for metalwork and begins teaching you techniques that Viking freemen guard jealously. Though you quickly understand that your growing expertise only makes you a more valuable piece of property rather than bringing you closer to freedom. The forge becomes your sanctuary from the household's casual cruelties as the demanding work requires concentration that temporarily blocks out the psychological trauma of your enslavement, while the creative satisfaction of shaping raw metal into useful tools provides the first positive emotions you've experienced since your capture. You find yourself taking pride in perfectly balanced knife blades and elegantly curved brooches, even knowing that your craftsmanship only increases your market value should Astrid decide to sell her skilled metalworker to another household seeking talented thralls. Your growing reputation as a craftsman brings visits from other Viking households whose members examine your work with appreciation that feels almost like respect, though you never forget that they're evaluating merchandise rather than acknowledging your humanity or artistic achievement. The bitter irony of creating beautiful objects while living in degradation becomes a constant reminder that skill and artistry mean nothing without freedom to control the fruits of your own labour and creativity. Eric teaches you the secrets of pattern welding, the complex technique that creates the distinctive wavy patterns in the finest Viking sword blades, knowledge that makes you incredibly valuable to any warrior who can afford custom weapons crafted by expert hands. You realise that mastering this technique has probably saved your life, as skilled metalworkers are too precious to waste on dangerous labour or casual punishment, though the psychological burden of creating weapons that might be used to enslave other people weighs heavily on your conscience. The forge's heat provides relief from winter's bitter cold, but the work demands physical strength and endurance that push your malnourished body beyond its limits, leaving you exhausted and covered in burns from flying sparks and accidental contact with hot metal. You learn to work through pain that would have seemed unbearable in your former life, understanding that showing weakness or requesting rest could result in reassignment to less skilled but more brutal forms of labour that offer no protection from your owner's casual violence. Your metalworking skills attract attention from travelling merchants who offer impressive sums for weapons and jewellery bearing your distinctive craftsmanship, though every silver coin earned through your labour flows directly to Astrid, while you continue receiving the same meagre rations and threadbare clothing that sustain ordinary field slaves. The economic success of your work creates a cruel paradox, where your growing artistic achievement only deepens your financial enslavement to owners who profit from talents they neither created nor truly appreciate. Historians still argue whether skilled slave craftsmen enjoyed significantly better treatment than agricultural workers, but archaeological evidence from workshop sites suggests that specialized thralls often lived in slightly improved conditions designed to protect valuable human resources rather than acknowledge their enhanced social status. You begin to understand that even artistic excellence cannot transcend the fundamental reality that slaves exist solely to generate wealth for their owners, regardless of the sophistication or beauty of their contributions. The forge work introduces you to other skilled thralls, a weaver whose tapestries rival those found in royal halls, a woodcarver whose intricate sculptures decorate wealthy homes throughout the region, and a jeweller whose delicate silverwork adorns the necks and arms of Viking nobility. These talented slaves form an informal community of craftsmen who share techniques and offer mutual support while remaining acutely aware that their artistic abilities have made them more valuable property rather than more human in their owner's eyes. Your hands develop the calluses and scars that mark experienced metalworkers, while your mind grows increasingly sophisticated in understanding the technical demands of your craft, creating an internal conflict between professional pride and moral revulsion at participating in a system that exploits your talents for others' enrichment. You find yourself caring deeply about the quality of your work while simultaneously hating every beautiful object that emerges from the forge, bearing the mark of your enslaved creativity. As spring approaches and the forge work continues to consume your days, you realize that skilled slavery represents a different form of captivity, rather than a step toward freedom. You're now too valuable to risk losing through escape attempts or defiant behavior, making your enhanced abilities another set of chains that bind you more securely to the household that profits from your stolen talents and artistic vision. The arrival of spring brings frenzied activity to Astrid's household, as warriors sharpen their weapons and thralls like you scramble to prepare the longships for another season of raiding. Your skilled hands now conscripted to forge the very tools that will be used to capture and enslave more innocent people from distant shores. You work feverishly in the forge, creating spear points and axe heads, while trying not to think about the human suffering each perfectly crafted weapon will eventually cause, your artistic pride warring with moral revulsion at participating in the machinery of conquest and bondage. The logistics of preparing a raiding expedition reveal the sophisticated planning behind what outsiders might dismiss as random barbarian violence, as you help calculate supplies needed for weeks at sea, craft specialized tools for ship repair, and even create lightweight shackles designed specifically for restraining future captives during the long voyage back to slave markets. Every detail has been refined through generations of experience, from the curved shape of grappling hooks to the precise weight of chain links that will hold struggling prisoners without adding unnecessary burden to already crowded vessels. Your metalworking skills prove essential for maintaining the weapons that make Viking raids possible, as you repair damaged mail shirts, reforge broken sword blades, and craft the specialized tools that warriors use to breach fortified settlements and subdue their inhabitants. The bitter irony of your situation becomes overwhelming as you realize that your own enslavement now contributes directly to the enslavement of others, making you complicit in perpetuating the very system that destroyed your own life and condemned you to this existence of skilled bondage. The warriors treat you with grudging respect during weapon preparation, acknowledging your craftsmanship while never forgetting that you remain their property, available for casual abuse or disposal whenever your usefulness ends or your behavior displeases them. You learn to accept their backhanded compliments and conditional kindness while maintaining the psychological defenses necessary to survive among men who see violence as natural and slavery as economically sensible rather than morally questionable. Loading the longships requires the coordinated effort of every thrall in the household as you haul supplies, weapons and equipment down to the harbour where the elegant vessels wait like hungry sea wolves eager to hunt across distant waters. You marvel at the ship's sophisticated construction, their shallow drafts perfect for navigating rivers deep into enemy territory, their flexible hulls designed to flex with ocean waves rather than break under stress, their efficient sail and oar systems that allow rapid movement regardless of wind conditions. The raiders' casual discussion of their intended targets chills your blood as they debate which monasteries hold the most valuable treasures, which coastal villages lack adequate defences, and which populations might yield the highest quality slaves for resale in established markets. Their conversations reveal that raiding has evolved far beyond random piracy into a sophisticated economic system with established trade routes, reliable intelligence networks, and carefully calculated risk-reward assessments that treat human suffering as an acceptable business cost. Astrid supervises the loading process with the efficiency of someone who has organised countless such expeditions, checking inventories against written lists while ensuring that every piece of equipment meets her exacting standards for quality and durability. You realise that Viking women often serve as the logistical backbone supporting their men's military adventures, managing the complex supply chains and financial arrangements that make sustained raiding campaigns possible across vast distances and extended time periods. Historians still argue whether Viking raids were primarily economic ventures or cultural expressions of warrior identity, but the meticulous preparation you witness suggests that successful raiding required sophisticated planning and substantial financial investment that only wealthy households could sustain over multiple seasons. The discovery of specialized raiding equipment at archaeological sites reveals the industrial scale of Viking expeditions that transformed scattered tribal conflicts into systematic campaigns of conquest and enslavement. Your final task involves blessing the weapons and ships through Norse religious rituals that you're forced to participate in despite your Christian beliefs, sprinkling sacrificial blood on iron blades while reciting invocations to gods of war and death, whose favour the raiders seek for their upcoming campaigns. The ceremony fills you with dread as you understand that your own hands are now consecrating the tools that will bring death and slavery to people just like yourself, making you an unwilling participant in religious practices that sanctify the destruction of innocent lives. As the loaded longships prepare to depart with their crews of excited warriors, you stand on the shore watching your own handiwork sail away to spread the same misery that brought you to this place, understanding that the cycle of violence and enslavement will continue as long as societies like this one can profit from human trafficking and the systematic exploitation of conquered peoples. The ships disappear over the horizon carrying weapons you forged, supplies you loaded, and prayers you helped consecrate, leaving you to contemplate your unwilling role in perpetuating the system that has stolen your life and will soon steal the lives of others. The screams that wake you in the pre-dawn darkness belong to Magnus, a young Saxon thrall who attempted escape 3 days ago and has just been dragged back to face Astrid's terrible justice, his broken body serving as a living lesson about the futility of seeking freedom from Viking bondage. You huddle in your straw bed listening to his agonized cries as the punishment unfolds in the courtyard, each tortured sound designed to remind every slave in the household that running away brings consequences worse than death itself. The elaborate ritual of punishment begins with Magnus chained spread eagle between 2 wooden posts, while Astrid explains his crimes to the assembled household, her calm voice describing his ingratitude and betrayal, as if discussing the weather rather than pronouncing sentence on a human being whose only transgression was yearning for the freedom that should belong to every person by natural right. You're forced to watch along with the other thralls, understanding that witnessing becomes participation in your own psychological conditioning against thoughts of escape. Astrid's creativity in designing punishments reveals itself as she orders Magnus's legs broken with iron hammers, ensuring that even if he somehow survives his ordeal, he'll never again possess the physical capability to attempt flight from her household. The methodical cracking of bones mingles with his screams to create a symphony of suffering that echoes off the longhouse walls like music from hell itself, while the free Vikings watch with casual interest as if observing a mildly entertaining performance. The psychological impact of witnessing such brutality proves as devastating as the physical torture itself, as you realize that escape represents not just personal risk, but potential doom for any slave unlucky enough to be recaptured after tasting even brief moments of freedom. Your own dreams of running away begin to feel like dangerous fantasies that could lead to similar destruction, making the very act of hoping for liberty seem like a form of self-torture that only increases your present suffering. Magnus's punishment continues for hours as he's subjected to a catalogue of cruelties designed to extract maximum deterrent value from his suffering. Flogging that strips skin from muscle, branding that burns identifying marks into his flesh, and the systematic mutilation of fingers that will mark him permanently as an escape risk should any other household consider purchasing his damaged remains. The efficiency of the torture suggests that Astrid has refined these techniques through years of practice on previous runaways, Other slaves whisper stories of escape attempts they've witnessed during their years in bondage, tales of thralls who made it days or even weeks into the wilderness before being tracked down by professional slave hunters whose entire livelihood depends on returning human property to their rightful owners. These specialists know every hiding place, every potential route to freedom, every weakness that desperate escapees might exploit, making successful flight seem virtually impossible for anyone lacking detailed knowledge of local terrain and weather patterns. The few thralls who successfully evaded immediate recapture often died of exposure, starvation, or attacks by wild animals, their freedom lasting only long enough to transform slavery's familiar miseries into new forms of suffering that ended in lonely deaths far from home or hope. You begin to understand that the wilderness itself serves as a prison wall around Viking settlements, its harsh climate and dangerous inhabitants conspiring with human hunters to make escape attempts exercises in prolonged suicide rather than realistic paths to liberty. Historians still argue whether Viking slave punishments were standardized across different regions or varied according to individual owner preferences, but archaeological evidence of deliberately broken bones and healed torture injuries in thrall burial sites suggests that brutal deterrent measures were common throughout Scandinavian settlements. The discovery of specialized restraining devices and torture implements reveals that slave control required constant vigilance and systematic violence to maintain social hierarchies based on human bondage. Magnus's ordeal finally ends when merciful unconsciousness claims him, though Astrid orders his broken body left chained in the courtyard as a continuing reminder to other slaves about the wages of defiance against their natural superiors. You're forced to step around his motionless form during your daily tasks, each glimpse reinforcing the lesson that freedom remains forever beyond reach for people like yourself, trapped in systems designed to exploit your labor while crushing your spirit through constant reminders of powerlessness. As days pass and Magnus slowly dies from his injuries, receiving no medical attention beyond the minimal care needed to prolong his suffering, you realize that his failed escape attempt has succeeded in one unintended way. It has murdered the hope of freedom in every slave who witnessed his destruction, replacing dreams of liberty with a realistic understanding that death represents the only certain escape from Viking bondage, making survival itself seem like collaboration with the forces that have stolen your life. The whispered stories begin with Olaf the Smith, a thrall whose exceptional metalworking skills eventually earned him not just freedom but adoption into his master's family, his hammer-scarred hands now wearing gold rings that mark his transformation from property to person in the span of a single remarkable decade. You listen to these tales with desperate hunger, searching for patterns or strategies that might offer hope of your own liberation, though the rarity of such success makes each story feel more like myth than achievable reality for slaves trapped in the grinding machinery of Viking bondage. Olaf's path to freedom started with saving his master's life during a workshop fire, carrying the unconscious man to safety while flames consumed years of accumulated wealth and crafted goods, his heroic actions earning gratitude that slowly transformed into genuine respect and eventual manumission. The story reveals how extraordinary circumstances can occasionally crack the rigid hierarchies of slave society, though you realize grimly that opportunities for such dramatic heroism seldom present themselves to thralls, whose daily existence revolves around mundane tasks far removed from life-threatening emergencies. Another tale concerns Freydis, a female thrall whose beauty and intelligence caught the attention of a wealthy trader's son, their forbidden romance eventually leading to marriage after she proved her worth by successfully managing his business affairs during his absence on lengthy expeditions. Her story offers hope that love might sometimes transcend social boundaries, though you understand that such romantic liberation remains available primarily to young women whose physical attractiveness can overcome the social barriers that condemn less fortunate slaves to lives of permanent bondage. The most inspiring story involves Thorvald, a former Saxon nobleman who maintained his dignity and education throughout years of slavery, eventually earning respect through his literacy and knowledge of foreign languages that proved invaluable for international trade negotiations. His master granted freedom in recognition of services that generated enormous profits, demonstrating that intellectual skills could sometimes purchase liberty more effectively than physical strength or manual dexterity, though such opportunities required cultural knowledge that most captured peasants like yourself simply didn't possess. These exceptional cases reveal the narrow pathways that occasionally allowed slaves to transcend their bondage, though each success story required a combination of extraordinary talent, favourable circumstances, and masters unusually willing to recognise their slaves' humanity rather than viewing them as permanently degraded property. You realise that freedom through merit remains theoretically possible while being practically unavailable to the vast majority of thralls, whose ordinary abilities and unfortunate circumstances offer no leverage for negotiating liberation from their owners. The psychological impact of hearing these stories proves complex, simultaneously inspiring hope and deepening despair, as you understand how exceptional the successful cases truly were among the countless thousands of slaves who died in bondage without ever experiencing freedom or recognition. The tales serve as both encouragement and torture, offering tantalizing glimpses of what might be possible while emphasizing how unlikely such outcomes remain for ordinary thralls trapped in systems designed to prevent rather than facilitate social mobility. Some freed slaves chose to remain with their former masters as paid servants, their liberation meaning less than you might expect when freedom brought no property, no family connections, and no realistic alternatives to continuing the same work they performed as slaves. Their stories reveal that manumission sometimes represented a legal formality rather than practical transformation, as freed thralls often found themselves dependent on former owners who retained economic control over their supposedly liberated lives. Historians still argue whether Viking slave manumission was common enough to provide realistic hope for the enslaved population, or remained so rare that it served primarily as a psychological control mechanism to prevent despair-driven rebellions. Archaeological evidence suggests that freed slaves often remained in their former masters' households for generations, their descendants occupying an ambiguous social position between slavery and full freedom that complicated traditional assumptions about medieval social mobility. The stories of successful slaves reveal common threads that offer practical lessons for survival and potential advancement. Maintaining dignity despite degradation, developing valuable skills that masters need, demonstrating loyalty that earns trust, and seizing rare opportunities that might transform exceptional service into eventual recognition. You begin to understand that liberation requires not just hoping for freedom, but actively positioning yourself to recognize and exploit the vanishingly rare circumstances that might make such dreams achievable. As you return to your daily tasks with these stories echoing in your mind, you realize that the tales of freed slaves serve multiple purposes. They provide psychological sustenance for surviving another day in bondage, while simultaneously revealing how thoroughly the system is designed to prevent such success for all but the most exceptional individuals blessed with extraordinary circumstances and masters' unusual generosity or practical need. The messenger's arrival at dawn brings news that chills your blood more thoroughly than any winter storm. Astrid's father has died during a trading expedition, and ancient Norse custom demands that his most valuable possessions, including several of his finest thralls, accompany him to the afterlife through ritual sacrifice at his funeral pyre. You watch your owner's face transform with grief and religious fervour as she begins selecting which slaves will die to serve her father's spirit in the realm of the dead, understanding that your own life now hangs on her arbitrary assessment of your value to a corpse. The selection process unfolds with terrifying randomness, as Astrid examines each thrall like a farmer choosing livestock for slaughter, weighing their skills and appearance against the social requirements of providing her father with an appropriately impressive retinue of servants in the afterlife. You stand with the other slaves trying to appear neither too valuable nor too worthless, understanding that exceptional skills might doom you to sacrifice, while obvious defects could result in immediate disposal as unworthy offerings to the dead. Your metalworking abilities become a death sentence when Astrid decides that her father's spirit will need a skilled craftsman to maintain weapons and tools in whatever realm awaits beyond the funeral flames, your artistic talents now marking you for destruction, rather than providing the protection they once offered against casual violence. The bitter irony overwhelms you as you realize that the very skills that saved your life during winter's hardships have now condemned you to death in service to someone you never met and who represents everything you despise about Viking society. The preparations for human sacrifice reveal the sophisticated religious machinery that supports these ritual murders, as specialized priests arrive to consecrate the victims and ensure that the killings follow proper ceremonial protocols designed to guarantee the dead man's successful journey to Valhalla. You learn that your death has been planned with the same meticulous attention to detail that Vikings apply to their raids and trade expeditions, your blood and suffering serving as spiritual currency in transactions with gods who apparently require human lives to maintain cosmic order. Other condemned thralls react to their death sentences with varying degrees of terror, resignation, and desperate hope that some last-minute reprieve might save them from the funeral pyre that grows larger each day as workers pile seasoned wood around the ship that will serve as their master's final vessel. You find yourself envying the slaves who weren't selected for sacrifice, their continued bondage suddenly seeming preferable to the honour of dying, to serve a dead man's convenience in whatever afterlife Norse mythology promises to faithful servants. The days before the funeral pass like a fever dream as you're given better food and cleaner clothes in preparation for your role as sacrificial offering, the improved treatment serving as constant reminder that kindness can be more terrifying than cruelty when it signals impending doom. You understand that you're being fattened for slaughter like livestock prepared for feast days, your temporary comfort purchased with the currency of your approaching death at the hands of people who consider murder a religious obligation. The psychological torture proves almost worse than the physical preparations, as you're forced to participate in ceremonies honouring the dead man whose selfish spiritual needs will soon end your life, pretending gratitude for the privilege of dying to serve someone whose existence represented everything oppressive about Viking society. The religious framework that justifies human sacrifice requires your apparent consent and enthusiasm, forcing you to collaborate in your own murder while maintaining the fiction that dying for your master represents honour rather than ultimate degradation. Historians still argue whether Viking human sacrifice was primarily religious practice or social display designed to demonstrate wealth and power through the destruction of valuable property. But archaeological evidence from ship burials suggests that killing slaves to accompany dead masters occurred frequently enough to terrorize entire thrall populations. The discovery of sacrificial victims buried alongside their owners reveals the systematic nature of these ritual murders that treated human lives as commodities to be consumed for spiritual purposes. The night before the funeral brings no sleep as you lie listening to the other condemned slaves whisper prayers, curses and final messages they'll never be able to deliver to families they'll never see again, their voices creating a chorus of despair that seems to mock the religious ceremonies that will soon transform your collective suffering into spiritual triumph for a dead Viking trader. You realize that tomorrow's sunrise will be your last, its light revealing the funeral pyre where your life will end in service to beliefs you despise, and a man who never acknowledged your humanity during life. As dawn approaches and you hear the priests beginning their preliminary chants, You understand that death by sacrifice represents the ultimate expression of slavery. Not just your labour and your body, but your very existence belongs so completely to your owners that they can destroy you to satisfy their religious obligations, treating your murder as an act of piety that honours their gods while erasing your individual humanity from the world forever. The Christian missionary's arrival changes everything, his simple wooden cross and quiet manner somehow radiating an authority that makes even hardened Viking warriors pause to listen when he speaks of a God who loves slaves as much as masters, whose divine law condemns the very foundations of the society that has stolen your life. You watch from your position among the condemned thralls as this brave monk calmly argues with Astrid about the spiritual implications of human sacrifice, his words carrying weight that surprises everyone present at what was supposed to be a simple pagan funeral. Brother Columba speaks your native language when he notices the Christian slaves among the sacrificial victims, his familiar words falling on your ears like cool water after years of thirst, offering absolution and hope even as death approaches with the rising sun. His presence transforms your final hours from desperate terror into something approaching peace, as he explains that dying for Christ's truth carries more honour than living in comfortable paganism, though he continues working desperately to prevent the murders that Astrid considers religiously necessary. The theological debate that erupts between the Christian missionary and the Norse priests reveals deep cracks in Viking religious certainty, as Columba challenges fundamental assumptions about the afterlife, divine justice, and the spiritual value of human sacrifice that supports their entire social system. You listen in amazement as educated men argue about your fate, while treating your survival as a question of cosmic significance rather than simple human decency, though their scholarly discussion offers more respect for your worth than you've experienced since capture. Astrid's own religious doubts become apparent as she wavers between traditional Norse obligations to her father's spirit and growing curiosity about Christian teachings that promise eternal salvation through faith rather than requiring human blood to purchase divine favour. The missionary's patient explanations of Christian doctrine plant seeds of uncertainty that blossom into genuine theological crisis, as she begins questioning whether her ancestors' gods might be demons masquerading as divine beings worthy of human sacrifice. The postponement of your execution comes when Astrid demands time to consider Brother Columba's arguments about the eternal consequences of murder committed in false gods' names, her decision buying precious days while she wrestles with religious questions that could transform not just your fate, but the spiritual direction of her entire household. You realise that Christian ideology represents the first force you've encountered that might be powerful enough to challenge slavery's foundations by asserting the fundamental equality of all human souls before God. Other Viking households begin experiencing similar theological upheaval as Christianity spreads through Scandinavia like wildfire, its radical message of universal human dignity threatening social hierarchies that depend on treating some people as property rather than recognizing their divine nature. You witness heated arguments between traditionalists who defend ancestral ways and converts who embrace revolutionary ideas about human worth that make slavery seem spiritually dangerous rather than economically sensible. The gradual transformation of Astrid's religious beliefs creates ripple effects throughout her household, as Christian concepts of sin and redemption force her to confront the moral implications of owning other human beings, her growing faith in Christ making it increasingly difficult to justify treating people made in God's image as livestock to be bought and sold. You watch hopefully as she struggles with contradictions between Christian theology and slaveholding practice that previous generations of Vikings never questioned. Historians still argue whether Christianity's opposition to slavery was immediate and absolute, or developed gradually through centuries of theological evolution. But medieval church records suggest that Christian conversion often led to slave manumission as new believers sought to align their practices with their faith's emphasis on human dignity. Archaeological evidence from Christianized Viking settlements shows declining numbers of slave quarters and increasing evidence of freed thrall integration into general populations. The momentum of religious transformation accelerates as more Viking families convert to Christianity, their new faith making slave ownership seem incompatible with divine commandments that require treating others as beloved children of God rather than exploitable property. You begin to see actual changes in daily treatment as Christian Vikings struggle to reconcile their evolving beliefs with inherited practices that suddenly seem morally indefensible rather than naturally ordained. Your own reprieve becomes permanent when Astrid formally converts to Christianity and manumits her entire slave population as part of her baptismal commitment to following Christ's teachings about human equality and divine love. The moment of liberation feels surreal after years of bondage, as legal documents transform you from property into person with the simple application of ink to parchment. Though the psychological adjustment to freedom proves almost as challenging as adapting to slavery once seemed, the irony doesn't escape you that religious conversion has accomplished what escape attempts, skilled labour, and desperate pleading never could: actual freedom granted not through your own efforts, but through your owner's spiritual transformation that made continuing to hold slaves incompatible with her new understanding of Christian discipleship and divine justice. You realize that systematic change sometimes requires attacking the ideological foundations that support oppressive systems, rather than simply resisting their practical applications. The weight of freedom settles on your shoulders like an unfamiliar cloak as you stand at the doorway of Astrid's longhouse, no longer bound by invisible chains, but somehow unable to simply walk away from the place that has defined every moment of your existence for what feels like lifetimes. Your legal manumission document crinkles in your trembling hands, its formal Latin phrases declaring your humanity in words that carry the authority of law and church. Yet your mind struggles to comprehend that the nightmare of slavery has actually ended through divine intervention, rather than death or permanent bondage. The other freed thralls gather uncertainly in the courtyard, their faces reflecting the same bewildering mixture of joy, terror, and disbelief that churns in your own heart as you all confront the prospect of making choices about your own lives after years of having every decision made by owners who treated you as valuable livestock. You realize that freedom brings its own form of suffering, as former slaves must learn to navigate a world that offers both opportunity and dangers to people who possess legal rights but lack property, connections, or clear understanding of how free society actually functions. Brother Columba offers practical guidance alongside spiritual comfort, explaining that manumitted slaves often face years of adjustment as they develop skills for independent living that bondage never allowed them to learn or practice. His gentle wisdom helps you understand that psychological liberation requires time and effort beyond the legal documents that transformed your status from property to person, as the mental habits of survival through submission must be unlearned before you can truly embrace the responsibilities and possibilities of autonomous existence. Some former thralls choose to remain with Astrid as paid servants, their freedom meaning less than expected when they lack alternatives to continuing the same work they performed as slaves, though now they receive wages and respect that make identical tasks feel completely different. You watch these voluntary workers with mixed feelings, understanding their practical choice while wondering if remaining in familiar servitude might prevent the complete psychological transformation that true liberation demands from people learning to see themselves as fully human rather than sophisticated property. Your own path leads away from the longhouse toward uncertain horizons that both terrify and exhilarate you with their infinite possibilities, as each step takes you further from the predictable misery of slavery toward the unpredictable challenges of freedom that might bring either fulfillment or new forms of suffering. the irony strikes you that liberty requires more courage than bondage ever did, as free people must take responsibility for their choices rather than simply enduring whatever fate their owners impose upon them. The broader transformation of Viking society accelerates as Christianity continues spreading throughout Scandinavia, its revolutionary message of human equality gradually undermining the ideological foundations that made slavery seem natural and necessary, rather than morally monstrous. You witness the death throes of an entire social system built on human exploitation, as Christian converts abandon slave ownership while pagan holdouts find themselves increasingly isolated in their defense of practices that new religious sensibilities condemn as spiritually destructive. The economic disruption caused by mass slave liberation creates chaos throughout the Viking world as households dependent on unpaid labour struggle to maintain their prosperity, while competing with former slaves who now work for wages rather than whips. You realize that your freedom represents part of a broader social revolution that will transform medieval Europe by replacing slave-based economies with systems that recognize the dignity and rights of all workers, regardless of their birth or circumstances. Historians still argue whether the Viking Age ended primarily because of Christian conversion, military defeats or economic changes, but the archaeological record suggests that abandoning slavery played a crucial role in transforming Scandinavian society from warrior culture to Christian kingdom. The gradual disappearance of slave quarters from settlement sites parallels the rise of churches and the development of legal codes that protected rather than exploited vulnerable populations. Your journey toward full psychological freedom continues long after legal manumission, as healing from the trauma of slavery requires confronting memories and emotions that bondage forced you to suppress in order to survive daily degradation and violence. You discover that recovery means not just learning to make choices, but learning to trust that your choices matter, that your life has value beyond your usefulness to others, and that dignity comes from divine love rather than human recognition or social position. The legacy of your enslavement will echo through generations, as children and grandchildren inherit both the trauma and resilience that slavery created in survivors like yourself, their lives shaped by stories of suffering that serve as warnings about human capacity for evil, while demonstrating the power of faith and hope to overcome systematic oppression. You understand that remembering becomes a moral obligation to honor those who died in bondage and prevent future generations from forgetting how quickly civilization can collapse into barbarity when people forget their fundamental equality before God. As twilight settles over the landscape and your eyelids grow heavy with exhaustion, you find peace in knowing that your story represents both ending and beginning, the death of Viking slave society and the birth of Christian ideals that would eventually transform medieval Europe into something approaching justice. The gentle darkness embraces you like a loving parent, offering rest and dreams of tomorrow's possibilities, while the nightmare of slavery fades into history where it belongs, never to be forgotten but finally mercifully finished. Your breathing slows and deepens as sleep claims you, carrying away the pain of memory into soft oblivion, where former slaves and former masters alike find equal rest in the democracy of dreams. The stars above shine down on a world slowly learning to see all people as children of light rather than property to be owned, their ancient radiance blessing your journey from bondage toward the freedom that was always your birthright, stolen for a time but never truly lost, now reclaimed through grace and held forever in hands that finally, blessedly, belong only to yourself. The cold wind whispers through ancient trees as our journey through Viking slavery comes to its gentle close, carrying away the echoes of suffering while leaving behind the hard-won wisdom that emerges from humanity's darkest chapters. You have walked beside the enslaved, felt their pain and witnessed their resilience, understanding now how ordinary people survived extraordinary cruelty while maintaining their essential humanity, despite every effort to destroy it. The transformation of Viking society from slaveholding raiders to Christian kingdoms reminds us that even the most brutal systems can change when people rediscover their fundamental equality before divine love. As you drift toward peaceful sleep, remember that freedom's light still shines in our modern world because countless forgotten souls endured bondage with dignity, their courage echoing across centuries to illuminate the path toward justice that each generation must choose to walk. Sweet dreams, dear listener, knowing that the dawn always comes after the longest night, bringing hope that no darkness can permanently extinguish.